Okay, so welcome along, everybody. Thank you for coming today to our writing circle on writing your conclusion. And my name's Kerry. I think I know most of you who are here at the moment, but if not, welcome along. Thanks for joining us. And we are going to get started straight away now. So to begin, QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders' laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. Okay, so I have popped the slides up onto Blackboard. We'll just pop the link into the chat for you. So the slides are there, the recording will go up hopefully later on today, but you will get an email with that information once I've put it up, but the slides are there now. Okay, so today is a writing circle, which means interactive. We've got exemplars, practical activities where you check your own writing. And we're looking at the purpose and the structure of your conclusion. We're going to look at some strategies for writing your conclusion. And if you would like to, it'd be lovely if you put into the chat where you're up to at the moment in your candidature. Are you still at proposal? Are you collecting data, analysing data? Are you near the end? If you want to pop that into the chat, that'd be great, because it is interesting to know where everybody's up to. Thanks, Aaron. Writing your findings. Yep. Collecting data. All right, and that's what we're up to, this little welcome now, and we'll have plenty of time today to get to our exemplar. So we got someone writing up, writing the analysis, collecting additional data and writing up, about to collect data. Yep, so everybody's, you know, a little bit at a different stage, but that's okay. All right, thanks for that. But yes, so hoping to get to the exemplar by 11:10 to give us really a lot of time for that. So just to begin to think, even if you are at those beginning sort of stages, you should have a little bit of an idea about this. It might change as you progress through your candidature, but what are you thinking right now? Can you write a sentence for each of the key contributions that your research will make to current knowledge? So you could choose one or all of these for this little activity. Is it a contribution for practice, for methodology, for theory? You might have one, you might have two, you might have three. We'll check a little bit later back with this. So if you can just write, you know, even if it's just a dot point with a few words, see what you think. But realistically, why would we be thinking about this now? Well, because that's going to be a key thing in your conclusion, is about your contribution. So did you get the UniHub email that would have been sent out yesterday? So in that one, I asked you to have your own draft ready for your conclusion. As always, I recommend you do a save as. And you have the session activity sheet handy as well. Just pop in the chat if you don't have it, because I can upload it. But yeah, just a really good idea to read those UniHub reminder emails, the ones that come out the day before, because if we want you to do anything to prepare for the classes, that's where we'll usually put it. They come out at 8 a.m. the day before the class. All right, so if you don't have it, that's fine. I'll upload it in a second. So the activity sheet has the exemplars. There's 2 exemplars. Now, these are the ones I've been using for this whole series. I've been using exemplar 1, the quantitative, and I've been using exemplar 2, the qualitative. Now, next year, I'll change it up, all right? We won't use these ones again, even though they've been really, really good for us to analyze. So if you are planning to come to more of these next year, then at least you'll know I will change these exemplars up. It's not easy finding exemplars, so that's why I've used these. And I think too, because you've been able to see the whole progression of the thesis as we go through. I will pop it into the chat in a second, that activity sheet. So if you want to know more after today, we do actually have just a few more classes left. And I'm popping the link in there for where you can go for HiQ. So there's 2 next week and then another one in that first week of December, you can see there. And also, you know, all of the recordings from this semester are actually up on Blackboard. So you can always go back to that. Obviously, this is the last one in the series. There's introduction, lit review, methodology, results and discussion, and our conclusion. They'll be all offered again, and we'll do some face-to-face next year too, which will be great. Just also promoting, you may have seen this, the HDR design sprint. You can see all the details there. You can see those dates and just 40 places available. So if you are interested, please contact the partnership team. I'm going to put that link into the chat as well. There we go. So there's the email there, but you can see there for that 20th to the 24th of February, when it's a full-time activity, you do get a $500 stipend. So just because it is, you know, a full-time activity there, but it's a really good opportunity to, you know, refine a whole lot of skills, meet a whole lot of great people, and do something fabulous with these sustainable development goals. So any questions, reach out to Simon. And as always, please use the e-prints, because you know how we've got our exemplars that we use. That's where I got them from. So you can see there, you can put in the thesis format that fits for you, put in some keywords, and it's a really good way for you to look at some effective writing strategies, look at structure, look at all of those sorts of things that might help you with the writing of your own thesis. Okay, let's get into it. So the conclusion, it's the culmination of all this hard work that you've been doing. I like that quote. All right, so yeah, the culmination of all your hard work. So you are the lead actor. You've managed everything up to now. Now is the time for you to shine and your research to shine. You know, this is important work for you as the expert scholar that you are. So this is not a time to back off and be shy. This is a time now to be strong and bold. Obviously, you can't go outside of your evidence, but you can definitely go hard. You know, you've poured your heart and soul into this research. It's taken however many years and hours. So this is the last part that the reader, the examiner, is going to read. So we want it to be great, and we want it to demonstrate your fabulous research in a really clear way. So it's not just a summary. Yes, you need to recap your main findings, but don't look at it as a laundry list of, oh, this is what I found, and then I found this as well. It's much more than that. It's the completion of this huge research project that you've done, and you're showcasing that you are an expert researcher and you're an expert in your field of study as well. So you're coming full circle. Be strong, be confident, be proud of what you've achieved as well. So, you know, you have a beginning, now this is the end. So even though it may not be very long, you know, it's certainly bringing everything together, and don't think of it as just something you've added on to the end. It's really important that the ending is great, like your beginning, and everything in the middle. So what's the purpose here? So you're giving the reader a clear understanding of how your research has advanced current knowledge and how it's going to be applied. Now, yes, you've already explained a lot of these things for sure throughout the thesis. But this is where we need to restate and really draw everything together, not as a summary, but as a very clear conclusion to this research that you've done. And as we said, you're showing you're an expert in the field. You've got to answer your research questions, say how you achieved your aims, and who are these research findings significant for, and how, and what's your contribution to the field. So there's actually a lot, isn't there, that you do need to do. And again, it's probably one of your shorter chapters in the thesis. So it might feel like, oh, that seems like a lot, but you're doing all of those things all at the same time. So what is it about the reader that you need to tell them? So answer the research questions and do it explicitly. Say how you've addressed the gaps explicitly. And then you've got your implications, your contributions, and then your recommendations. Now, these overlap, okay? So your implications are, what are the consequences of what you found? Then your contributions is, okay, well, I've advanced the knowledge, I've helped to fill a gap, I've gained this new insight. And then, of course, your recommendations are going to say, all right, based on these implications and these contributions, this is some specific actions and steps that stakeholders are able to do. And how you set this out exactly and how long each of these are is going to depend on your feedback from your supervisors, and just thinking about, you know, how you undertook the research. You know, are you doing it through your framework? Are you answering your research questions? Are they the subheadings maybe? So this is another reason why I keep saying go into ePrints and have a look at what other people have done. Chances are you'll look at someone else's thesis and you'll say, that's okay, but I want to make mine slightly different. But that's all part of the process. Research limitations are sometimes not in the conclusion, they're just in the methodology. Again, something to double check with your supervisor, what they want you to do. It could be different in different fields of study, but we would always have that future research section. Where are we going next? Okay, so that's a really important. And also don't forget too, with all of your answering and your knowledge that you've gained, of course, you still most likely haven't answered everything. So future research will certainly be something that pops up into your head easily to be able to write at least a couple of directions that future research could go. It could be to do with your limitations as well, basically addressing those limitations. That's another idea if you're sort of a bit stuck. So something really important is not to go beyond your evidence and not to bring new data in all of a sudden. It's the same old thing as in an undergraduate essay as well. We never bring in new information in a conclusion. Remember, there's no surprises in academic writing. So you can't all of a sudden, oh, and by the way, I had this great, fantastic finding that I didn't tell you about yet, okay? It could be, so a question in the chat, is it all right to use significance instead of contribution? Could be, yes, but that, so you would just have to explain that in that section where you're talking about the significance of the findings, that's the contribution that you're making. All right, you would still need to use those words somewhere in there, but if you're meaning for your subheading potentially, then I think that would be okay. Just need to be clear to the reader that you have made a contribution to current knowledge. So then if we're saying that the conclusion isn't a summary, what's the difference between your conclusion and your discussion? So conclusion is that completion of the entire study. It's call it your closure after all of this hard work. Whereas your discussion is an extension of the findings, isn't it? Or the results chapter, where you've said, here's the evidence that I found. And then you're explaining and interpreting the research findings in your discussion. You're giving specific details. You're referring back to those findings, even if it could be one little piece of an experiment or something that a participant said or a survey result. You're referring specifically back to your evidence and putting it in within the literature as well and your aims. So it's specific, but starting the broad and starting to allude towards those contributions and significance. Okay, so discussion is explaining and interpreting, and then conclusion is then restating, responding to your research questions and explicitly saying this, based on the discussion I've just told you, this is what that now means for the conclusion of this research. And these are the exact and specific and explicit contributions that the discussion that I've told you in the previous chapter, I've started that. And so now this is exactly even more explicit and concluding. I hope that makes sense. Of course, there's overlap, right? And of course, there's repetition, but your discussion chapter is going to be much bigger, isn't it? So your conclusion is really boiling down, you know, and also in your conclusion, you're probably not putting much of the literature in, which that's another difference really, is that your discussion, you've got a lot of literature in there, okay, because it's a mirror of your lit review. Okay, so your conclusion really is putting your contribution and the significance in there, but stating more explicitly what your research has done, and there's not as much of the literature in there. Now, some people do combine the discussion and conclusion in one chapter, but again, they're going to be separate, aren't they? They would need to be separate because each one has a specific purpose. So then how are you going to get started on your conclusion? I would say start anytime, don't wait. Because as I said, remember at the beginning, I've said, you know, what contribution do you think that you're going to make? You can pop that into a draft conclusion document, have it there, keep adjusting, keep revising and adding. I know quite a few of you said that you were up to your data collection and analysis. Perfect time to start building that story of what you found. And if you're writing a draft like that, where you're just putting your thoughts in, yeah, some of it will come into the findings, some of it will come into the discussion, some of it will stay in the conclusion, but at least you've started, you've got some words on a page and you're beginning to put your connections together. So the other thing, like any draft chapter, thinking about how long does it need to be? I'm going to take a guess for you at around 5,000 words. Don't hold me to that. You might have a few less, you might have a few more, but it's certainly one of the smaller chapters. Think about your introduction chapter. It'd be a similar length to that. So start anytime, set up a draft structure, have some draft subheadings, few dot points, and you can come back to that once you've, you know, worked further on your discussion. So then if you are setting up your draft, or you've already got your draft up and running, let's think about the structure. So my first advice, start off with it simple, and then you can focus on the content, and then you can play around with the subheadings and the structure later. But does it work to put your research questions as the structure? Because you do need to answer them, maybe. Or are you going to put the implications, theory, method, practice, if you've got all of those? Or have you got a framework that you've been working, a research framework, conceptual framework, theoretical? Does it work to structure it that way? So it'll be a bit of trial and error to figure out the best way. And we're going to look at some examples in a minute that might help. So just trial and seek feedback as always. But initially, just start off with something really simple with a couple of subheadings, and then that'll at least enable you to get started. So this is an example structure, all right? Now, what I want you to notice, narrow to broad, isn't it? So you start narrow, restate what your aims were, explain the findings, and respond to your research questions or your hypotheses. Then, because that's about your study explicitly. Then you're coming to, all right, well, based on this, this is the contribution, the implications, and then down the bottom, we go broader again, right? Based on this, here's the recommendations, limitations, if you're putting them in your conclusion, and then your future research direction. So narrow and broad, triangle shape, which is interesting because we do this for our introduction, don't we? Broad to narrow. And I talk about that all the time in all of your sections as well, don't I? And your chapters. I'm always saying you start broad and you go narrow. So this, the one chapter, well, you're going to go the opposite, right? You're going to go narrow and then broaden out, okay, to the field. So what else does this tell us about how we could structure the conclusion chapter? Similar to the way you structured your introduction, but in reverse, because remember they're mirrors. So conclusion is a triangle, introduction is an upside down triangle. So let's look at some examples. Question in the chat, is there a specific order when writing recommendations, limitations? Yeah, I would do recommendations first, then limitations, and then future directions. That's the way I would do it, because if we think of, I wouldn't want to put your limitations before you got all your important, great contributions and significance. It's a bit like, oh, by the by, there's a few limitations to this research, but that's not a bad thing. Every research has limitations, okay? So it's not, use the limitations as a way to lead into your future directions. That would be my advice. But also don't forget, if you've put limitations in your methodology chapter, your supervisor may not want you to put it in the conclusion chapter, but they might. I know mine did. So I did have the limitations in there. And also, don't put 50 limitations, put 2. That would be plenty, right? And usually for HDRs, it's around the fact that you're one person, so you couldn't interview 50 people. You couldn't do 500 experiments. You could only do 3 experiments or whatever it is. You're limited by time. You're limited by the fact that you're one person. All right. So your limitations don't need to be 100 things. And so if one of your limitations was the fact that maybe it was something you couldn't do something longitudinal, you couldn't compare 2 different experiments, you could only really do one and do it multiple times or whatever it might be, then that would lead to your future directions, wouldn't it? Because then you could say, okay, got some really good insight here from just conducting this 1 or 2 experiments. But if researchers had the time and the resources to do 50 experiments and then compare the results, this would give us even more insight. So another question, how much difference between limitations in the conclusion chapter and the methodology chapter? More likely mentioned, yes, I would say yes. Because if in the methodology chapter, what you're doing is basically saying, okay, this is my methodology, this is how I'm collecting the data, this is how I'm analyzing the data. And you are acknowledging that all of these data collection tools, methodologies, methods have advantages and they have disadvantages. So what you would be doing is explaining, all right, I'm doing focus groups, the advantages of this, the disadvantages of this, and I've minimized them by doing A, B, and C. So yes, you'd be in your methodology chapter, you're being very specific and addressing all of the different parts of your methodology. Whereas in the conclusion, it's a lot more brief because they've already read the methodology. They already know. So you're just reiterating, hey, got these really great insights. I've made this contribution. I am aware that there's limitations to my research. Therefore, future researchers should do these things. So think of it like that, as a progression through the sections that way. But I would explicitly say to your supervisors, hey, do you want limitations in the conclusion, yes or no? And they'll know. They will have an opinion about that. So I'd be surprised if they said up to you. I think they would either say a strong yes or no, don't bother. All right, let's have a look at these examples. So now these are from the exemplars. I haven't put the table of contents in the activity sheet though, but that's okay, we can see. So this is exemplar 1. Remember, it was a quantitative thesis by publication. So tell me what you think here about these subheadings. Chapter 10, by the way, 9 chapters before this. I'm not sure how many of you are going to have that many chapters, and that's okay if you do, by the way. I'm not judging and saying it's bad at all. But yeah, chapter 10, what are you thinking? And also notice the discussion and conclusion are in this chapter. And now, even though there's only 5 subheadings, it's really quite long, isn't it? I think I've figured 30 pages. You don't have to say it's unfortunate you have 10 chapters. If you have that many chapters, it's potentially like this because you're doing thesis by publication, which this one was, okay? And that doesn't mean, so this chapter, it's about 30 pages, and my guess was it's about 10,000 words, very approximately. But remember, it's the discussion and the conclusion, right? So that's why, because what did I say before? Conclusion chapter, about 5,000, didn't I? This is half, double, sorry. Yeah, but it's because it's both. And look, that's not the rule of thumb that you need a 5,000 word conclusion. You need what you need, all right? I'm just saying it's okay if it's quite short, but 2 or 3 pages would be too short, all right? All right. So contribution to knowledge, strengths and limitations. That's interesting, isn't it? Implications. So in this case, the implications are the implications of the contribution to knowledge would be my guess. And we'll see when we read the exemplar. Recommendations, and then they've got a conclusion after, which then wraps up the whole thing. So some people are saying headings are clear. So you don't, yeah, some people don't like the discussion and conclusion together. Having read this thesis basically from beginning to end, there's quite a lot of, because they've got by publication and they've included the journals. Yes, the leg ulcer thesis, correct, it is, yeah. So because they've already done a lot of the discussion, really. So in my mind, this chapter 10 could have just been called the conclusion, to be honest. Maybe. Who am I to say, though? The researcher would have thought long and hard and had many conversations with their supervisor. So, but it is the kind of subheadings that we would normally see in the conclusion chapter. Exemplar 2, that's the qualitative thesis by monograph. And by the way, one of the reasons why I don't put what the thesis is about in these activities is because I just want you to focus on the subheadings and think about if they're clear or not. So if I put the name of what the thesis topic is up the top, that might take it away from you looking at the subheadings. All right, so this is our qualitative thesis. This is about the intervention for the kids with learning difficulties. It's the one we've been looking at the whole time. Again, look, chapter 10. So it's not unusual to have that many chapters. All right, so what do you feel about these subheadings? A little bit different, the first 3, aren't they? So they're obviously to do with their themes, what they investigated, potentially their conceptual framework, right? The first three. They've got limitations, future research, and then implications for teaching practice. Yeah, so we don't know yet, 10.1, 10.2, 10.3. My guess, and I'm only saying I'm guessing because I can't exactly remember, but the contributions would be within those first three subheadings, but we don't know by the subheading, do we? So it's an interesting difference between the two, isn't it? This one's just said basically what the things that they're doing, and then here they've actually gone with some of the main topics in the thesis. Yeah, contribution could also be in the implications for teaching practice. That's right. That's right. So here's another one. Mixed Methods by Monograph. 8 chapters, this one, even though it was mixed methods. Interesting. What do you reckon here? 8.1. Main findings. Now you can see there, I'm just going to quickly go back. See, see how conclusion starts on 168 and 10.1 starts on 168. This one's quite short, isn't it? What did I look at there? It's 6 pages, this one. And then look at this one. See how discussion and conclusion and then the first subheading starts on the same page. So what does that tell us? It tells us that there's probably only 1 or 2 paragraphs to introduce the chapter. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that that's something to remember, is you do need to set it up before you go into your first subheading. Whereas look, we've got probably a little bit of a longer setup there. See how the first subheading is 261. So how many pages? 18 pages. So if 30 pages is 10,000 words, so it's probably around that 5,000 words. What do you think about these subheadings? Yeah. So again, look down the bottom, and they've all had limitations, haven't they? Sorry, I'm going to go back again. I'll probably make you dizzy. Sorry. See how oh no, this one didn't have limitation. Oh yes, it does. It's got it at 10.2. So, again, I would still talk to your supervisor though, whether they want it. So this one, as a suggestion, remember I said before, maybe around your research questions, that could be. So this, yeah, it's clear. So research questions 1, 2, and 3 are answered. Then the extension, then the thread is we go to the implications. What are the recommendations based on the implications? And then you can see there too, limitations of the study. There's not that much there. And then directions. All right, so as I always say, I know I'm a broken record, but you know that it's true. These section subheadings are really important. They communicate the key ideas. And sometimes a reader, when they first, well, let's talk about the examiner. Of course, they're going to look at your table of contents and they might jump around initially. All right, then they'll go back and they read all the way through. So just check your table of contents regularly. Look at your subheadings. Are they clear? Do you think what you've written in there matches the subheadings? And try to avoid those vague subheadings like introduction, because you have an introduction chapter, or background. Say background to the research or background to the theoretical framework. I don't know, but just saying background, vague. All right. So I want you to now have a look at your conclusion. Have a look at the subheadings. Now we looked at that narrow to broad triangle, didn't we? And you've got some potential subheading options there. So what have you got in there now? Do you think that they're okay? What are you thinking about the order? Maybe you're not sure yet, and that's okay as well. But remember, your conclusion is based on your study and what you did. So yes, look at others for ideas and look at those examples, but don't sort of get worried. Do what you think is right. Leave yourself a note and just say, this is the way I've done it because I think this flow works for my study. All right, so I'm giving you a minute now to go in and have a look and make some notes. Okay, so we've just had in the chat, we were just saying that sometimes it's hard to divide between implications and contributions. So maybe a good way to think about it is like this. Your implications are for your stakeholders, for your people, for your the users of whatever it is that you're examining, investigating. You know, if you're a scientist or in health or whatever it is, you're still going to have stakeholders, okay? So think about your implications as how and what insight you've gained that will benefit your stakeholders, whereas your contribution is your contribution to the body of knowledge, to the literature, to the field. Divide it like that, and that should really help you, okay? Because remember, with your implications and with your contributions, potentially they may be divided into practice, methodology, and theory. Now, not everybody has all three of those for both implications and contributions. It's just going to depend, but maybe that could help you because they do, of course they overlap, because one of your implications for your stakeholders is also that it is going to advance the body of knowledge, right? So it's just a different way of discussing it and coming from a slightly different angle. So try that and hopefully that will help. But certainly I acknowledge that there is that overlap there, and sometimes it can be a bit messy in our heads. Write your messy drafts, tidy them, get your feedback, and then go from there. All right, let's move on. So we talked about the purpose and all the things we need to do and the things we need to have in this chapter. Let's look at some strategies of how we can achieve those things. So in the chat, suggestions on the order, implication, or contribution. I guess I would probably lean towards the implications first, but I don't know. I don't want to recommend that for sure. It's a hard one, isn't it? It's like all of our chapters. There's a lot of things we want to say, isn't there? But we can't say everything at once. My advice, set the reader up and say, firstly, I'm going to tell you about the implications. Then I'm going to tell you about the contribution, or the other way around. All right. I think that's fine. I don't think there's a right or wrong, to be perfectly honest. All right. So what are our strategies for this well-written conclusion? This is all the things we're going to look at. All right, let's go. All right, it's always about the reader. Again, that's the other thing I'm a broken record about. Subheadings, tense, and your reader. So with your reader, we don't want them confused or unsure. We want them constantly reading through your chapters going, interesting. Oh, I see. We don't want them to ever be saying, huh? What? That's not what we want, is it? So that's about that logical flow and clarity of ideas, thinking about your subheadings, leading the reader through, and scaffolding. So how do we achieve this? By getting feedback from readers. As always, write your drafts, revise, get feedback. It's your job to engage the reader and lead them through. At no point do you let the reader figure stuff out. Okay, you need to tell them exactly what they need to be thinking, because you want them thinking what you're thinking. All right, so we need to lead them through. So we always say first impressions count, don't we? Well, so do last impressions as well. So how you finish, you know, is really important. Don't be vague, be clear, demonstrate your expertise. So when you're writing your conclusion, I'm going to say this again and again, be strong, be explicit, be clear. Okay. There's no, maybe this finding is useful. It is useful. Okay, and explain exactly why it's useful and how you've contributed. Be strong. Go back to that big picture. All right. Remember, we were talking about the difference between your discussion and your conclusion. One of those differences is in your discussion, you are able to have those tiny details. Okay. Oh, here's some evidence that I got that explains this implication or whatever it is. In the discussion, you're doing that. You're citing a whole stack of literature. You're not doing that in your conclusion. Maybe a little bit of citing if it's necessary, but the bulk of the conclusion is you. It's your voice. You're showcasing everything you've done and everything you've achieved. The examiners will focus on the conclusion, all right? They're going to focus on all of it. We know that. We know they will. We know that they make their judgment fairly quickly after the first sort of 2 chapters. We know that you can bring them back around if they weren't all that happy with those first 2 chapters. But we also know that that's one thing we're striving for, is making sure those first couple of chapters are really, really great to get them on board and wanting and persuading them and getting them really thinking and seeing you as a great researcher who's done this fantastic research project. So they often will, according to this research by Mullins and Kiley, they might read the abstract, read the introduction, and flip to the conclusion. Okay, then they go back and read the whole thing. So your introduction is really important, but we want the conclusion to be strong. Okay, let's make it good. They've spent a lot of time, or they will, reading. You've spent a lot of time. Make the conclusion great. I know that for a lot of us, by the time we get to the conclusion, we poured everything into the discussion and we're like, oh, just want to get this thing completed. But you need to stay with your passion. Keep that passion coming through, because this is so, so important. So what do they want, the examiners? They want you to restate and highlight exactly what you've been arguing all the way along, all right? That this research is valuable and that's made a contribution. You engage with the findings. It's not just a list, oh, we found this, this, this. Incorporate those findings into the contributions, the implications. Make sure that everything is linked to your research problem and your research questions, right? So that common thread, we talk about the common thread all the time as well, don't we? It started in the introduction where you said, hey, there's a problem. So this is my aim. This is the questions that we're looking to answer. Then your conclusion, hey, achieved the aim, I've gained insight into the problem and I've answered and have these responses to the questions. But they also don't, you can't overstate. So I know that I'm saying be strong, be robust, and don't be scared about, oh, have I really found anything? Of course you have, but then you can't overstate. So another time when you're balancing, but you will have found enough, you will have the insight, you will have the contribution there that you don't need to go beyond anyway. But just be really careful of that, because that's certainly something that they'll be looking for, to making sure that the evidence has already been presented in the chapter of the results or findings, then discussed in terms of the field as a whole, and then your conclusion comes. So we talk about this a lot. I was just saying, wasn't I? Introduction starts the story, conclusion finishes the story. So try to look at them as mirrors. Now, whether or not you can use similar subheadings, potentially no, but the content will be quite similar in as far as The introduction starts it all, starts the threads. The conclusion finishes the threads. Those threads have gone all the way through. Our examples had 10 chapters, and some of you have 10 chapters, right? So in every chapter, you've talked about aims, research questions, problem. Same in the conclusion, but you're bringing them to the end, and you've got that final completion of the story. So oftentimes, I know I spent a lot of time on this, where when I was writing my conclusion, I was also back revising my introduction, and I ended up, in fact, spending a lot of time on the introduction and actually revising it based on what I'd come up in my conclusions, if that makes sense. Because remember, your introduction chapter, whether you're doing an MPhil, whether you're doing a PhD, your introduction would have been written in the proposal stage, and a lot's happened since then. So it's not a bad thing to go back to your introduction and revise it. You might revise it a little, you might revise it a lot, you know, because now you know so much more about your research topic, about the field, about your actual study, of course. So when you've got your conclusion and you're writing that, almost simultaneously go back to your introduction. I really strongly recommend that, okay? They should be mirrors in terms of the content, as in introduction says, hey, this is all the stuff I want to do because of these reasons. Conclusion, I did everything and this is what I found, all right? Yeah, so definitely, and even you just have to go back to your introduction, and it's a perfect time to do it when you're writing the conclusion. What do we keep saying? You've started your story, finish it. Okay, your introduction is making that good initial impression. You're engaging the reader. You've kept them engaged all this way. So use those key points to guide the structure of your conclusion. As I said, I don't know if you could really have the same subheadings, because your introduction is quite specific, isn't it? You know, this is the research problem. This is the background. So your conclusion isn't going to have the background, is it? Do you see how there's that slight difference there? But there will be aspects that can be written as a mirror, if that makes sense. So you can't include anything new in your conclusion. That's a really important strategy as well. And as I keep saying, just keep going back and adjusting. And don't forget too, when you wrote that introduction chapter, you didn't know exactly what you were going to find. You had an idea. Absolutely, you had an idea. So maybe you found something unexpected. Definitely need to go back to the introduction and potentially the lit review and make sure those seeds are planted back there as well in the introduction and even the lit review. They're definitely looking for the link, the examiners. Don't make the reader wait. Those initial paragraphs are so important. Remember what we were saying, how which should go first, the implications, contribution, whatever you decide, let them know, right? Give them a brief outline of what you're going to do, and also reiterate, this was the aim of the study. This is the aim of this chapter as well. This is what's going to be discussed and how you're going to structure. So because these initial paragraphs can be quite difficult to write, maybe don't write them until you've written most of your chapter. Maybe you could do some dot points or a little draft initially about what you're thinking, then do it, and then come back and write this these introductory chapter paragraphs a little bit later, because they are so important. You want to start every chapter off really, really clearly and explicitly. So why? So the reader's going, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, great. Can't wait to read it. All right, let's have a look at an example. Now, this is in your activity sheet. This is exemplar 2. It's the first paragraph. Community of inquiry means an intervention based on classroom inquiry to improve thinking and reasoning. And tell me what you see. Research aims in there. Do you have a clear idea of what's going to happen in this chapter? The aim of this study was to investigate the impact of a social cognitive teaching methods, a community of inquiry on the academic functioning of children who experience learning difficulties. Good, isn't it? Good way to start in my book. What's the aim of the study? Findings indicated that, in general, students made progress. They demonstrated positive changes. Reading comprehension abilities improved. Conclusions are made in relation to the impact of the COI on. So there, remember we saw the table of contents, and they had the 3 subheadings: self-regulated learning, self-efficacy, reading, okay, and the limitations are described, and future research and implications. So that is the first paragraph of the chapter. We're pretty clear what they're doing. So research aim, straight up. I like that. Findings indicated. So that's very brief and broad, which is okay. Now, when I say broad, it's broad in terms of there's not much detail, but it's narrow in terms of the study, right? Remember our triangle for a conclusion, narrow to broad. So when I'm saying that these sentences here are broad, I mean they're broad in terms of what the findings are, and then the details will be later because we're setting up the reader at the beginning of the chapter. But it's narrow, the content. The content is specifically about this study, right? Yeah. So I'm not sure in the chat a better layout. So sentences 3 and 4, yeah. So we can see basically that these are insights, then they're going to be implications, aren't they? All right, so have a look at your draft. I'll give you a minute. Now, as I said, maybe this is hard to write these initial paragraphs, potentially, if you're not quite sure. So maybe just pop in some really broad dot points or something, just so that you remember to put this good couple of first paragraphs together. All right, so some key strategies that we're going to look at is using strong vocabulary, being explicit and clear, making the explicit links, and we're going to look at some examples. Well, one example. So this one is our exemplar 1, which is the quantitative. So what we're looking for is being strong and punchy and being explicit and clear. All right, so see what you think. Again, the sentences are numbered for us to be able to do this. With regards to education, remember this is about the community of inquiry, the intervention in the classroom for the kids with disabilities. So with regards to education, the findings of this thesis can be used in many different... Oh, no, my apologies. No, it's not. It's the quant. Sorry, it's the quant about the ulcers. Sorry. With regards to education, the findings of this thesis can be used in many different wound care related programs at all levels of training and education, and there's a big list of those. These institutes have a responsibility to ensure the quality of human resources in healthcare services and improve public knowledge about wound care. They need to advance vocational education for patients. Carers, clinicians incorporate wound care into these education programs. So quite a lot, isn't there? For example, they can be implemented in teaching wound care for both undergraduate and postgraduate students. It was already presented, this evidence, to second year and third year nursing students. The evidence can also be included in education for professional development, such as physicians and nurses. All right, so what have we got? Sentence 2 is strong. I remember doing something the same. Yep. Strong and punchy, 2 and 3. Yep. All right, so let's have a look. So I've said strong, punchy language. So the bit at all levels, it's not really punchy, but what they're saying is that it's very wide, the implications, right? All levels of training. So not just at a hospital, but at universities as well. What do we got? They've got a responsibility to ensure, they need to improve, they need to advance, they need to ensure again. These original findings, so that's clear that we're talking about this researcher's findings. We need continuous professional development. So that's good. And yeah, it is explicit because they've given us examples, and the bit about that they've already been using the findings, that's good. Yep. So, and remember, it's very clear. I've highlighted education there. So this is the implications for education. Now, of course, so who are the other stakeholders in this research, even though you haven't read it all? It's the patients, right? And the health professionals. So this is just one part of the implications. In the chat, I wish there was a word such as must. Yeah. Well, so this is your choice. Can you go that hard and say must? Can you be that strong, or do you have to say can? Now that's going to be different for everybody. You need to weigh that up about how hard you can go. And that's what I mean about strong, punchy language. At this point in the conclusion, be as strong as you can be. So remember at the beginning, and we talked about some key contributions, and you were going to jot down a few things. Keep these in mind, and let's have a look at what it exactly means to have an original and significant contribution. And remember, this is different to your implications, right? Different, but overlapping. Just to make it tricky for us. Okay, so a lot of discussion in the chat about using can or must. It's going to depend on what field of study you're in and how precise you can be and how strong you can be. But that's another question or something to discuss with your supervisors. At some point, there will be some findings where you can go hard and say, you know, that this is a clear something that must be done. Okay, so what is an original contribution? So it comes to your literature, right? What you're adding, what new perspectives. Is it you've taken a cross-disciplinary approach to something that's not normally done that way? Are you adding or extending on a theory? Are you informing a debate that's currently out there? Remember, you're providing another brick in the wall. You're building on previous literature. So your impact, in this case, or your contribution would relate to theory or policy or practice or methodology potentially. Maybe you're using a methodology that's not usually done in your field of study, and it's yielded some really interesting findings because of that exact thing. Yeah, so so often there are debates in fields of study, so informing and adding extra insight to a debate is a really good original contribution. So original and significant, try not to be overwhelmed. All right. A small finding, a small contribution can still be significant. Significant to who? To your stakeholders. All right. And significant to your field of study by adding that extra brick in the wall. So be brave, trust yourself, be convincing, be persuasive, which is why we need that strong, punchy language. So make sure there's no doubt about what your research question responses are. And everything's underpinned by your evidence. This is a good one to keep in mind so you don't go a bit crazy. It's a PhD. It's not a Nobel Prize. All right. You're not expected to come up with a solution to world peace. You know, and also remember your reader, your examiner, they're interested. You've persuaded them all the way through. They've been on board. You're not telling them something that's surprising that they didn't already know. You're wrapping it up really neatly for them and being very clear and explicit about your exact contribution. Keep informing and persuading of the value of your research to your stakeholders and to the field. And yeah, your training as researchers, you're going to graduate and, you know, you're demonstrating that you are a researcher and that you deserve to continue on your research career. And this is just one step, that thesis is just one step in your career. Limitations, again, we've talked about whether or not you're going to put them in here or just in the methodology. You know, keep it brief. All right. All research has limitations, so it's not a bad thing. Make sure you say that you minimize them, explain very briefly how, because you would have already had it in the methodology, most likely. And then you can link to your further research. Yeah, so often for us in a thesis, in a HDR context, it's about sample size, availability of time. And I mean, that could be the case through your whole research career. You know, even if you collaborate, you can't investigate an entire research population generally. So, you know, all studies are going to have limitations. So with this part, the future research, it's not about saying, oh, well, I didn't find very much, so we're going to need more studies. No. It's about, hey, this is a significant contribution, but you know what? We still need to know more. So let's extend. Okay. And then that extension. So for example, if one of your limitations was that maybe you could have found out more if it was a longitudinal study done over a longer period of time, or had more participants, or you did more experiments. By addressing that limitation and doing more research, what are we going to get from that? What are the benefits of that? So make sure you explain that as well, which should usually just be another sentence. It's not enough to just say, oh, future researchers should have a bigger sample. That's not enough. You need a little bit more than that. So stay on track, write everything down. As always, you know, play around with your structure, write your drafts, see what your supervisors and peers think about it. They'll raise the questions that you maybe hadn't thought of. You can ask them some questions. Make sure it's very clear about your contribution. Use your evidence. Remember, don't go away from that, and know new information. Draft writing. That is a key strategy. You know that now. And then you refine later. Try not to edit as you write, just write, come back and do the revising at another time. You'll just interrupt your flow. But yes, always proofread before you seek feedback. I really and truly believe in those last 2 points. Leave a draft for a day, then proofread so you have fresh eyes, and print. All right. I truly believe those things are really great strategies to make your drafts better before you seek feedback. So HDR writing peer feedback sessions, really great way to get some feedback. We've got 3 more left for the year. Friday. we've got one. I think I actually have the link. Yep. So if you want to come, we would love to see you there. It's not scary. It's actually a really nice class with lots of supportive participants. So I highly recommend. Be confident. Don't undersell, but don't promise the world either. Nice balance is what you need there. All right. When I say don't promise the world, because you can't go up further than your evidence, can you? But no loose ends. This study has finished. Okay. Yes, we need some future research, some other studies. This study itself, it's finished, concluded. Just lastly, a couple of common mistakes that I see all the time. No introductory paragraph or paragraphs at the start, no good. Orientate your reader, must, you must. Too short. I've seen a draft that I've been asked that as a thesis editor, proofreader, 2 pages. You know, like 10 dot points or something. Not quite enough, I wouldn't imagine. No clear answer to the research questions or hypotheses. Were your hypotheses proved or not proved? You've got to be explicit and state this. Even if you already said it in the discussion, you need to say it again. Make sure you're not vague. What actions need to be taken based on your research results? That's your recommendations, isn't it? So spell out the exact steps. So it could be something like, depending on your field of study, we'll go with the obvious one of being a teacher in a school, the recommendations are going to be most likely something to do with support or professional development for teachers to do something useful for students. So who are the recommendations for? They're probably for, if you're talking about public schools, it's for the government or for the principals to do something. So make sure you're very explicit about those recommendations. What are the actions and who's going to do them? And also don't be sort of apologetic. Be strong. Don't sort of say, oh, well, there was only one main result. No. Hey, so great. This main result is so important. And the implications of it are this, and the contribution to knowledge is this. Okay, so be strong and brave. I do see this a lot, that first point about how sometimes they're badly written, the conclusion, because they've been rushed, because there's a deadline, spent so much time on the discussion and didn't quite get enough time on the conclusion. So started early. The other one is claims that aren't supported by evidence. And as I said before, in your conclusion, try not to go into the nitty-gritty details of previous studies. Keep it about the field of study in general, because you do the nitty-gritty in the discussion. And I would avoid quotes unless it's a seminal quote from someone very, very important in your field, or just something that really ties everything together really nicely. Consider tense. Please, I'm begging you. You're writing in a mix of past and present in your conclusion, but not in the same sentence. Past and present cannot be in the same sentence. It's impossible. So what I mean by that is when you're talking about what your research participants or what happened in the lab or whatever it is, that's in the past. What you did, what they said is in the past, but this suggests is in present tense. This means, this shows, okay, you can be in present tense there. Couple of useful phrases. Please use the Manchester phrase bank if you haven't already. I promise it will be something very, very useful. And I guess my last bit of advice is, end with a bang, make it great, make it memorable, go hard, be strong, call to action. What's your key recommendation? What's a direct benefit that your stakeholders are going to gain, something that you have been talking about all the way along, that the reader will be like, oh yeah, I'm really motivated. Yes, this is an original, this is a significant contribution, and I think it's going to make a difference to whoever it is. All right. Maybe it's the whole of society. Maybe it's a tiny portion of society. Maybe it's patients who have leg ulcers. Maybe it's kids with disabilities who are in class and we want to help them to achieve all of their goals. Whatever it is, make it really, really strong. You know, you've poured your heart and soul into this, right? So we want it. We want fireworks, really, we do. And when you do submit for external examination, unfortunately fireworks don't come out of the computer, but they should. They 100% should. Maybe that's something we can work on, any IT people. All right, it's exemplar time. We're a little bit over where I wanted to be, but not too bad. Oh, Michael's already on to exemplar 2. Awesome. All right, so just to finish up, there's just a few things to really take away from today. Keep engaging and persuading the reader. Finish the story, your research narrative, and make sure you've got a convincing evidence-based argument. Think of that, the connection between your introduction and your conclusion. And you know, you're a researcher. All of you are researchers. You've made a contribution. Make sure that it's really explicit and clear. As we said, end with a bang. So if you could give some feedback about today, that would be fabulous. I'm just putting the link into the chat, or you can use the QR code. All right, so thank you for any feedback is fab. As I said, don't forget we've got 3 more writing sessions here, writer's block, writing up your thesis and proofreading. And of course, you can always check out this series of the Introduction, Lit Review, Methodology, Results Discussion. You can see all that on Blackboard. I'm actually just going to pop the Blackboard link. Oh, that's great. In the chat, recommending come to writer's block. It helped me a lot. Awesome. That's great to know. Everything is on HiQ. Of course, you get your HDR Matters newsletters. If you've never used the skills assessment tool, I really recommend that. It's a really good way to consolidate where you're at. Someone's popped in the chat, a great discussion with exemplar 1. Fabulous. I'd love to hear about it. Just one more second. I'll just let you know next week. No, this is tomorrow, Thursday, November 17. There's a HDR Careers Q&A. You can always learn something good in those. We've got a Wellbeing Lounge on Thursday as well, the Writers Wellbeing Lounge. And there's a new program called Campus Radar. Sorry, I don't know anything about it, but if you go in and have a look at HiQ for that research job, so that's on Friday. Let me just pop HiQ into the chat, so if anyone's interested in that one. So we've still got events sort of up until the first week of December, and then we'll be back in end of Feb with writing sessions, but we'll be around. You can always email if you need. All right, Q&A. Anyone got a question? Anyone want to make a comment? I'm really happy that you enjoyed those discussions in the breakouts. They are so important. And the reason why I don't come into them is because it's not about me. It's about you guys as readers. I've spoken enough. And yeah, I just think it's good for you to be in there with your peers and talking about your insights and perceptions. Yes, go ahead, Michael. Please turn on your mic.
Oh, thank you, Kerry. Yeah, thanks to the people the students in the breakout room. That was great. The 2 quick things are I didn't have time on Natasha's workshop yesterday, but I just wanted to thank you and Natasha, because I've been going to these things, I think, for over a year. I think I've notched up so many, and they've been so helpful, or everything. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you as well. Thank you for coming and being engaged, because it's so lovely for us when we can see people in the chat, and yeah, it's so good. So thank you to you too.
And I had a meeting with Kathy the other day. Thank you for recommending. I've actually had to email her this morning with a suggestion for a workshop. And the last thing I want to say, and once again, because we're doing our theses, we've got to be really careful with everything else we get involved with. But when you get a postgraduate degree, initially masters or whatever, you're, as an examiner, you can't mark PhDs, but you are allowed to mark undergraduate honours theses. And I actually did one, got paid for it too. Now I wouldn't take one at the moment because I'm about to go into data collection, but because I had those 2 weeks spare, they said, yeah, go ahead, just as another skill, because I've been a reviewer and an editor. And it was really amazing to see someone at that level write in a lot of the things that you and Natasha have talked about in your, particularly the coherence and the cohesion, as I was saying to Kathy. Those two workshops are extremely important. And I notice now, because I probably have to do corrections to an article I submitted before I came to QUT, that's going to help enormously, because they're important in the theses, but they're also very important in journal articles and conference papers. So once again, thank you both very much. I really appreciate
Thanks, Michael.
and all the resources as well. They were great to keep. So thank you.
That's so lovely. Thank you. And that's really good advice there's still a few of you still here about the honours thesis. Yeah, and it's the same with the exemplars. It's improving your skills by looking at somebody else's work. Now, sometimes you're going to look at their work and you're not going to like it for different reasons, or you think you do it in a different way, and that's okay. That's all part of improving your own skills. So that's a really nice insight, Michael. Thank you so much, and a really good idea. And reading, and the honours thesis is an interesting one, isn't it? Because there's high expectations. These are high achieving students, but they're doing something in such a short time frame, basically 2 semesters, or even actually less, because the actual data collection is quite short, isn't it, in an honours thesis? So everything's quite compressed, but they also need to, as you say, showcase all of those effective writing practices and the research practices as well. So very interesting. Yeah, making changes the night before on an honours thesis. Yeah, well, actually, my daughter's about to go into a psychology honours year next year. So do you think she'll have someone to help her? Yeah. But her main thing will be, like for all of us, she needs to have a good supervisor who's supportive as well. So yeah, she doesn't know her project yet. She won't find that out yet for a little while. And I think she'll get stuck with something that potentially she's not overly interested in. And that's what's so great for us being HDRs, isn't it? You choose your topic and you can have that passion and end with that beautiful bang in your conclusion and those insights as well. So great. All right. Has anyone else got a question or a comment? Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it was a lovely chat today. There was lots in the chat, wasn't there? All right. Well, we might finish up. Thank you to everyone that came along. I really appreciate it. I hope to see a couple more of you maybe again during the year, but if not, enjoy the holiday break. Make sure you give yourself a little bit of a break if you can. Come back nice and fresh in 2023, but hopefully I'll see some of you in those last few classes that we've got. All right, take care, everybody.